I kicked something in the night a couple of months ago, so if I look like I'm limping, I am. And it's not much better today. So just know it's nothing serious. I don't know how many of you have ever done that, but it's miserable. And it was my big toe. So anyway, I want to get that out of the way. It's going to take me a little longer this morning to get from here to there, but I'm going to be fine. So good to see each of you today. We know we've got guests here. We know that you have choices when it comes to churches. And so if you would honor us today by filling out that card and then having an opportunity to drop it off at the back when you leave today, we sure would appreciate it. We're not going to send you offering envelopes. It's not that kind of a deal. We really just want to know you're here and if we can pray for you. Very, very important. When I was younger, my very favorite thing to do was to camp. I love camping. Then I got married, had 3 daughters. Their idea of camping is the Anatole, and so I've done very little since I've gotten married. But growing up, it was my favorite thing to do. There was nothing like a hot dog cooked over an open flame covered in cream corn. Now, if you've never had it, do not knock it. It's phenomenal. I love the sound of coyotes howling in the distance. I love not having to take a shower or put a napkin in my lap or sit around in a circle sharing my feelings. In other words, there's nothing about camping that I absolutely did not love. And I can remember when my mom and dad started allowing me to sort of branch out and kind of do my own campouts with some friends as I got a little older. And I can remember, regardless of the group of friends, somebody, before the night was out, felt like it was their self-appointed duty to tell scary stories. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's the chainsaw that couldn't say no, or it's killer clowns in the closet, every story began the same way. It was a dark and stormy night. And I loved every one of those stories. But if I were really transparent with you this morning, I don't like dark. Dark is hard to get our brain around. Light I get, dark I don't. Light I embrace, dark I endure. But most of us in this room are old enough to know that both darkness and brightness are a part of life. Folks, we've come out of a really brutal 2 years, not only as a nation, but as a world. Unlike anything I've ever seen in my 65 years of living. And I think as we're starting a brand new year, we're still wondering, is this year going to be brighter for me than it was last year? And the answer is nobody in this room knows. You don't know, and I don't know. For some of us it will, and for some of us it won't. You do understand that some of you right now are in a season where life is giving. You're having babies. Your son or daughter is hitting their first home run. You're buying a new house. You're getting bonuses at work. But some of us in this room are in a season where life is taking. We're burying people we love. Some of you have gone through a very nasty divorce. Maybe someone in this room over the last few months has gotten a really bad doctor's report. Some of you this year, when you look back on this year, at the end of this year, you're going to say, this was a year of sunshine. But there are going to be some of you in this room that are going to look back on 2022 and go, that was a year of darkness. Because for some of us in 2022, God's going to send us to the cave. You say, cave? What's the cave? The cave is that season of life where God seems to isolate you. That the cave is that time that God seems to disappear and submerge like a submarine without even producing a bleep on your radar screen. It's where every single breath that you take is filled with a smell of mustiness and a damp cave. Have you ever been there? Guarantee you, most of you in this room have. When I was in middle school and high school, I hadn't visited the cave. Nobody in my life had died. I'd never lost anything but a goldfish. I'd not lost a job. I'd never had anybody break up with me. When I was young, I'd never visited the cave. But as I've gotten older, I've been to the cave many times. Anyone else in here can testify to that? So it's not a matter, ladies and gentlemen, of, and I'm looking over here because this, don't take this offensively, but this crowd over here is a little bit younger, okay? It's not that I like this group better, but I'm just saying, some of you over here have not experienced the cave. You haven't. So it's not a matter of whether or not we will visit the cave. It's only a matter of how many times will we visit the cave. But I'm going to tell you, I believe, and I think you'll see this by the end of the morning, that caves get a bad rap because we misunderstand what the cave experience really is all about. Caves, for the most part, are not brought into your life by God to kill you. Caves are brought into your life by God to educate you. Caves, for the most part, are not brought into your life to punish you. They are brought into your life to educate you. In other words, caves aren't tombs, they are teaching institutions. They are preparatory rooms. They are places where God does something to you that He might do something significant through you later down the road. It is the place that God reveals His sweetest secrets. And so this morning, if you have your Bibles, I'm going to ask you to turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 22. And I want to explore the subject this morning, the secrets of the cave. Because ladies and gentlemen, please hear me. You're either in a cave right now, you've just come out of a cave, or you're about to go in one. Everybody in this room, you're either in it right now, you've just come out of one, or you're about to go into one. There is not anyone in this room that can say, I can sleep through this one. Because while you may not be in the cave today, that doesn't mean you won't be in the cave tomorrow. So in 1 Samuel chapter 22, beginning at verse 1, we read these words. So David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. He escaped to the cave of Adullam. If we could see this story on Blu-ray, or we could see it streaming, or we could watch it on our computers, you will notice that the arms and the legs and the face of little David are a golden brown. David has gone through one sunshine event after another. These were the brightest days of King David's life. He has just killed the number one terrorist in Israel, a giant by the name of Goliath. For doing so, he won first place in Saul's military conquest, which was the hand of Saul's daughter. Now, if he knew about that woman what you and I know now, he would have asked for the second place trophy. You'll hear me very rarely say she was a horrible woman. She was a horrible woman. Had there been a KJEW playing the top 40 Jewish hits, there would have been ballads of David played all throughout the day. Had there been a Hasbro toy company, all the little G.I. Jews would have had David's face painted on them. These were the brightest days of David's life. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, most of us are old enough to know that our lives seem to run like a set of railroad tracks. Some of the brightest days of our life parallel some of the most difficult situations also in our life. How many of you have ever experienced a time in your life that the situation was difficult, but God was very near? That's the way it is. That often in our lives, that some of the greatest days of our lives parallel some of the most difficult. When you read the story of David, the one thing said of David that everybody in this room wants said of them is, here is a man, or here is a woman after God's own heart. Ladies and gentlemen, please understand this. This is a title that David would never have gotten apart from the cave. Do you hear me? We love the tagline. I'd love it on my tombstone, but we've sometimes failed to understand that apart from the cave, David would never have been that man, because the making of a usable man or the making of a usable woman almost always involves darkness. How many of you have ever gone into your grandparents' house when you were young and you would see old pictures of yesteryear? Some of them were really beautiful. Do you understand that even those beautiful photos of yesteryear were developed in a dark room? And ladies and gentlemen, what is true of pictures is also true of people. So when the text tells us in verse 1 that David escaped to the cave of Adullam, this is a multiple choice test. You ready? Let's see if you pass the test. Based on what you just read, did David A, crawl to Adullam? Did he skip to Adullam? Did he trot to Adullam? Did he run to Adullam? He ran. He ran. He's running for his life. The typical mode of transportation into any cave experience is running. You're running because of a rebellious child. You're running because your sweetheart of so many years says, I don't love you anymore. You're running because your boss said, we don't need you anymore. You're running because the doctor said, you have something that's going to kill you soon. There's always something that is driving us to the cave, and running is the typical mode of transportation to it. What was David running from? He's running from a very jealous, spear-throwing king. A man that David comforted on many occasions is now attempting to take a spear and run it through the body of David. That's why David ran. But God's getting ready to do something significant to David so God can do something significant through David. And so let's take a look at it. First thing I want you to understand this morning, if you're taking notes, is that God always teaches us things about ourselves. I'm going to make these points and then show you in a text why I got to this conclusion. First of all, God revealed to David some things about himself. Sometimes when God sends you to a very dark place, the only light that God shines on you are those areas of your life that need to change. You're wanting God to reveal a lot of things, and God says, no, this cave experience is about change. I'm trying to bring about change in your life. Now, we all say we like change, but what we really are saying is, I like other people to change. I want my neighbor's dog to change. I want him to stop barking. I want my children to change. I want them to be nice. I want my spouse to change. I want them to treat me better. But most of us are really not all that interested in change for ourselves. And yet the Christian life is nothing but change. It begins with change. That's justification. It continues in change. That's sanctification. It ends in change. That's glorification. If your life has not been radically changed by Jesus, then you don't know Jesus. I'm just telling you. Because he radically changes our life. So for David, there were two things that God wanted to do. Number one, if you're taking notes, write this down. First thing God wanted to do was to move David's crutches. Now, you may not know this, but David was crippled. Huh? I've never read that. I didn't say he's physically crippled. He was emotionally crippled. And if you read 1 Samuel 19, 20, and 21, you're introduced to David's crutches. One of his crutches was named Samuel. One of his crutches was named wife. One of his crutches was named family. One of his crutches was named self-esteem. Call them whatever you want, but all of those crutches have one thing in common. You know what it is? They're idols. They're things or people that David leaned on more than he leaned on God. So let me tell you what God did. God took those things and people away, some temporarily, some permanently. I want to ask you a question this morning, folks. Is there anything or anyone in this world that you love more than you love God? Is there anyone right now that you're leaning on more than you're leaning on God? I'm telling you, that thing or that person is an idol in your life. And if you're not careful and deal with that, God may take them out of your life. Because let me tell you what God's in the business of doing. God's in the business of bringing his children to the point that they realize God is all I have, so that you can come to understand that God is all you need. Do you hear me? It's very important for you to understand this. He brings us to the point where he's all we have, so we can understand that he is all I need. Do you understand that every single human relationship that you have right now on the face of the earth is either going to disappoint you or die? Aren't you glad you came to church today? Yes. Do you understand that? Every single relationship is either going to disappoint you or it's going to die. So God was trying to take David and remove David's crutches so that David would depend on God. You see, caves are idol busters. And that's exactly what God's doing in his life. So God moved his crutches, but second of all, God made some cuts. Gene Edwards, in his book, A Tale of Three Kings, said that David was running from a crazy spear-throwing king, and as Saul seemed to be growing in madness, David is growing in understanding. And I believe what Gene Edwards says is true, that David was on the path to becoming the second greatest spear-throwing king of Israel. But God didn't need another spear-throwing king, did he? Didn't Israel have one spear-throwing king too many? Shake your head like this. Yes, he did. I just want to make sure you're alive. Okay, good. God had one spear-throwing king too many running Israel. So listen to me. God's not interested in having a Saul too. So here's what he did. I want you to listen very carefully, because I promise you, some of you right now are dealing with this. God took Saul, let's call him Saul 1 in parentheses, and he used Saul 1 to cut out of David, potentially Saul 2. The spirit of Saul that beat in David's heart was in the very marrow of David's bones. The spirit of Saul, which was a spirit of self-sufficiency, of arrogance, of jealousy, of pride, of independence, God cut that out. And he used Saul 1 to cut out of David Saul 2. A number of years ago, there is a man, and I will not mention his name, who hurt me deeper than any man has ever hurt me. In fact, the guy's still a pastor today. And not only has he deeply wounded me, he wounded my family. And he's wounded dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people since. Still is today. And I remember one day going, God, I don't get this. Why do you not deal with this? You certainly see the injustice being done to me. Why do you seem to ignore this? And then there was a day that God spoke to me. Some people say, was it audible? No, it was louder than audible. And here's what God said. He said, I know you're repulsed by his arrogance, his self-sufficiency, the fact he's an egomaniac. But Warren, what I'm doing is I'm using him to cut some things out of your life that's going to stop you from being him in the future. That's what I'm doing. I'm using him to cut out of you now those things that I see in your heart, that if I don't deal with them, one of these days you're going to wake up and you and that guy are going to look like twins. And so understand that God uses people to cut things out of us. Now let me say for you girls over here that are in middle school, high school, I'm not talking about physical abuse. I'm not talking about sexual abuse. If that's going on in your family, somebody needs to know that. That's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about being mistreated. We're talking about being emotionally or sometimes verbally abused. I'm not talking about sexual abuse, physical abuse. even though the other two are just as bad. But I'm wanting you to understand that God was more interested in the development of David than he was at that moment in dealing with Saul, which he would. But he's more interested in David's development. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the cave is where Saul too dies. And it's where David, Saul too, died as well. Because what God did, and God does this often, you won't like it, but it's true, that God enrolled David in a school that very few people attend, very few people graduate. It's called the school of brokenness. It's the place that God broke him and made him and molded him into a usable vessel that would lead the children of Israel for over 50 years. Not only does God teach us things about ourselves, he also teaches us things about himself. When God takes away our crutches and lightens our heart, we begin to see God in a new way. When he strips our security, he takes away our sustenance. He brings us to a point of surrender. We see the great I am of the Bible in a new way. Stephen, would you mind putting Psalm 142 up here, please? Psalm 142 is what is referred to as a miktam. Now, this is very important. A miktam is Hebrew for an inscription. Most scholars believe that David wrote the 142nd Psalm in a cave. So this morning, I want you to hear a caveman. Now listen to me. Spoiler alert. Only those of you who have been in a cave are going to be able to relate with this. If you've never been to the cave, all you're going to hear is whack, 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 whack. But if you've been in the cave, you're going to understand this man exactly. Because listen to me, only a cave woman can speak to a cave woman. Only a caveman can speak to a caveman. So I want you to listen to what David learned. He said, I cried aloud with my voice to the Lord. I made supplication with my voice to the Lord. Have you been there? I poured out my complaint before him. I declare my trouble before him. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me. Have you ever been there before? You felt as though your heart would break, that your spirit was being crushed, that what was going on was overwhelming to you. And he said, you knew my path, Lord. You knew the way where I walk. They've hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, for there's no one who regards me. There's no escape for my soul. There's no one who cares for my soul. I cried out to you, O God, and I said, you are my refuge. Do you understand what God's doing? He's removing David's crutches. David's starting to see God in a brand new way. He didn't say, people are my refuge. My wife is my refuge. My children are my refuge. He said, you are. You're my portion in the land of the living. Give heed to my cry, for I'm brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you've dealt bountifully with me. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it's in the cave that David began to see God in a way he'd never seen God before. He began to understand, people aren't my fortress, God is. People aren't my sunshine, God is. People aren't my deliverer, God is. Because here's the deal, folks. You will never fully appreciate sunshine without going through dark. You do understand that, right? You will never appreciate sunshine without going to a very dark place. So God revealed to him secrets about himself. But finally, God also teaches us secrets about others. I want you to look at verse 2. He says, everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was discontented gathered to him. And he was captain over them, and there were about 400 men. If you're taking notes, jot this down. The cave is not just about you. The cave is also about other people. The cave that God brings you and I to today is so that we can help people who will go through that same cave experience in the future. I mean, look at the group of men, how he describes them. First of all, he said, God brought him a group of men who were under distress. The word distress means under intense pressure. Had David been under intense pressure? Shake your head like this. Yes, absolutely. And so now God brings him other men who are also going through intense pressure. Look at this. Also, there were a group of men who were in debt. The word debt here means to lend on interest. Number 3, he mentions that these men were discontented. This word, it's so deep. It means bitterness of my soul. It deals with people who have been wronged and mistreated. In other words, God brought a group of men who were going through the very same thing that David had gone through in the past. Listen to me, folks. Please hear me. Ladies, I guarantee you in a room this size, some man in the past has abused you. There's just no way in a room this size that I'm not talking to a woman that's happened to. Some things happen to you that never should have happened. Some things happen to you that are illegal. Some things happen to you that are absolutely repulsive and hideous and grotesque. But God's not going to waste it unless you, because of the bitterness of your soul, don't see what God's trying to do. Because only a woman that has been through what some of you in this room have been through know how to minister to other women who've also been through those same things. What I'm trying to say is very clear. And I've said this to you before a few weeks ago. Sometimes you get to choose your ministries in life. Sometimes you don't. You don't. Sometimes God said, what happened? I didn't cause it. What happened was horrible. What happened shouldn't have happened, but I'm going to take that lemon that happened to you and I'm going to turn it into lemonade. I'm going to take something that you cannot glory in to bring glory to myself. Only God can do that. Only God can do that. God never wastes the pain that we've been through in the past. Never, ever. And I also said this to you as well. Suffering is inevitable. Every man and woman in this room, every teenager in this room is going to suffer deeply before you die. Suffering is inevitable. Misery is optional. Suffering highlights two things, folks. Suffering highlights the weakness of humanity, and suffering highlights the glory of God. Two things. How many of you would agree the world has pain? Can I see your hand? World has pain. How many of you know Christians have pain? Yes, we have pain. Here's the difference. We have purpose with ours, and the world doesn't. God promises to work everything together for good. Now, some of you are saying, well, hey, what happened to me was not good. I didn't say it was. Paul didn't say it was. He said God promises to work everything out for good. You see the difference? Out for good. These men that God brought to David would eventually become his mighty men that would help in his establishment of the kingdom. See, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes life is like playing a set of cards. How many of you have ever played cards and the hand that you got stunk? You just got this hand. You go, this is the most pathetic hand I've ever seen in my life. So when you get a hand that stinks, what do? Well, you play that hand to the best of your ability. You lay the cards down, you walk away. There are a lot of people that have walked away from God because God has not done what they thought God should do, as though God is our genie in a bottle. Instead of saying, God, what do you want to do through this? How can you be glorified in this? We go, why is me? Woe is me. Let me tell you two things about a pity party. Number one, no one ever shows up. Number two, they never have anything good to eat. Ever. But we throw them all of the time. So sometimes life is going to deal you a hand, and you're going to look at the hand and you're going to go, this hand stinks. You have two choices. You can say, God, how can you be glorified with this hand? Or you can say, I'm walking away, I'm leaving my faith. Those are your choices. Those are the choices. A few years ago, there's a she's not a young lady, she's older, but she was diagnosed with breast cancer. It's a horrible illness. And so I wrote her a letter, and I just said to her, I said, hey, and I've got permission to share what I'm about to share with you this morning, but I sent her a letter, and I said, Amy, I just want you to know we're praying for you. I'm so sorry about what's going on, and I just wrote her a long letter. So I got this letter back from her, and here's what it said. She said, Warren, thank you so much for the letter. I don't have any idea. God, we're all like this. I don't have any idea what God's doing in my life, but I want you to know I trust him. I used to think that my mission field was my little bitty classroom and my own children and my husband, but now I realize that my new ministry involves cancer land. I want to be a cancer survivor, but more than anything else, I want God to be glorified. She said, when you pray for me, don't make the main focus of your prayer my healing. You make the main focus of my prayer that I would honor God in whatever he takes me through. Folks, we're all going through these dark seasons. But the good news this morning is that God will work something together for good. He will accomplish something unbelievable if you will let him. Please let him. Father, life is so stinking hard. I remember the words of Job when he said, man's days are short and full of trouble. And God, that so sums up our lives. It just seems like everything is hard. Everything. Everywhere we turn, there's disease. Everywhere we turn, there's death. Everywhere we turn, there's dysfunction. Everywhere we turn, God, please give us courage to live in this generation with eyes on you, understanding that we do win. We will one day, as your children, be resurrected with you. There will come a day that these tears will cease and that our hearts will be filled again. But until that time, oh God, please help us to understand that even these dark seasons have a purpose in our life. And I pray that somehow you'd give us the grace to honor you through it all. In Jesus' name.